Are you in a band? Are you an entertainment entrepreneur? Are you a musician, songwriter, or producer? Or are you wanting to start a career in the music industry? If so, then this podcast is for you. On the Do That Music Thing podcast, we'll be interviewing subject matter experts, artists, and other leaders in the music industry to identify actionable strategies to move you forward in your career, spark some inspiration, and at the least just have some fun talking about music. So let's get to it and do that music thing. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Do That Music Thing podcast, where we talk to industry executives, producers, songwriters, and anyone in the music industry making waves to provide you with actionable items to move your career forward. And today on the show, I have an amazing guest, producer, songwriter, TW Hale. How are you this morning, sir?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Chris?
I am doing all right. Thank you so much for being on the show. As I said, TW is a songwriter and producer who has credits with everyone from Reba McEntire, George Jones, Billy Ray Cyrus, you name it, Joe Diffie, he's there. So I'm just incredibly excited to have you on the show and talk about your journey from songwriting into producing music and how we can share that information with folks listening.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me first. That's great. And I'm willing to tell them whatever they need to know, and we'll see where it goes.
Excellent. Sounds good. Well, let's start off with your journey. How did you start in music, and how did you end up becoming a songwriter and producer? Let's start there.
Okay, I'll do the condensed version because you probably don't want all the years of that. But, grew up doing music as a kid, knew music was what I was going to do from day one. And then just chased, put myself through college playing honky tonks in Texas. And then, but the college degree I got was in jazz. So it was kind of an interesting kind of balance of things. So, and from there, just started doing professional music from day one of graduation. Yeah, you always do whatever it takes to pay the rent, but 80% of what I did was music until I was able to do 100% of it. So did that, and then moved to Nashville in 1987, and just have been going forward since then, so songwriting and producing. Yeah.
Excellent. So when you started off, you were a jazz player?
When I started off, I was raised on piano. Because my older sister played piano and I wasn't going to be outdone by my older sister. So I took piano lessons at like first grade, second grade. And then from there, one Christmas, I asked for a guitar. Actually, I asked for drums. I was running around the house beating on everything with sticks and tree limbs in my hands, begged my mother and dad for a set of drums. And wisely, they bought me a guitar. Because as much as I love drummers and they're my best friends in the world, I can play without having to have a band with a guitar, instead of drummers who have to depend on other players to be there to make the whole scene come together. So then from that, just moved forward to just playing. And at North Texas, I went to North Texas State University, which I think right now it's called the University of North Texas. But back then it was North Texas State University. And I went there as a jazz, first as a composition major, because I'd always been writing. And then as a jazz degree, the 2 years they had a jazz degree, back then it was like controversial to have a degree in jazz because the powers that be said, well, only Beethoven is really something you get a degree in, something classical. So the 2 years that I was there, I was in the couple of years in as a jazz major and studied jazz guitar and jazz piano and played in the jazz bands and just absorbed all of that. And then from there, when I graduated, I think it finally phased out. The last year I was there and went back to composition. So then left there and went to Dallas, Texas, and started writing jingles and commercial music and what have you, and then played in clubs at night. So
awesome. So you really kind of cut your teeth in those Texas honky tonks, and simultaneously you're writing jingles and commercial music?
Yep. Oh yeah. And yeah, absolutely. And by the time I got, because while I would go home and go back to the apartment in Denton, Texas, where North Texas State is, I would do that. I'd be writing jazz arrangements and big band arrangements and quartet arrangements and trombone quartet stuff and all that, and vocal arrangements, because I was also studying vocal singing for studio work with Lou Gillis, who was a fantastic arranger. And then I'd go grab my guitar and go hit the honky tonks in between, Denton and Dallas to play my weekend gig. And so then I'd go back on Monday morning, go back to what I was doing. So I was kind of, doing what I was raised with, and then learning a bunch of new stuff. So yeah, I did that. And then after graduation, when it became more, yes, played in bands, everything from country bands to, at that time, pop bands, that were all the clubs where dancing was going on. I put a band together, and they were all North Texas players. And so we could play anything from jazz fusion to a country song if we needed to. But mainly we were doing dance stuff in places that were just clubs. And then during the daytime, I was writing jingles, singing jingles in the studio, and doing that kind of stuff.
I know guys that made and make a living just playing in Texas. Now, I don't know if that's just because of the size of the state, but it just seems like there's a really cool scene in Texas still that's just kind of been isolated. Was that kind of the case?
Yeah, I mean, it really, if you're from Texas, then you have to realize, and one of the things is that Texas is a nation unto itself. So it's so big, and I have friends that have stayed there. I have friends that have been here in Nashville and said, you know what, I'm going back to Texas where I'm from, and they're making a killing. I mean, they're making a great living playing Texas, playing the music they like and doing what they do. So you can travel Texas and play everywhere and make a great living, raise your family, and have a regular life. I had thought about going back there for years, but our daughter was born here, and she's now married, and we have our first grandson. And so we're here now, because now we're anchored to grandchild. So we're staying here. But we go back to Texas all the time, and I have friends, musicians there, and I'll go back and see them and play with them and what have you. So it's fun, two worlds,
So how much do you think or feel that consistent gigging affected how you listen and how you write music?
Yeah, I think for me, it's a major deal, because if I'm being a player and a vocalist, when I listened to music, when I was in a band that had to play, and when I was at North Texas writing parts for big band, and every part has a register and a place, and you have to fit them in. It's like a puzzle. Where do they fit in rhythmically? Where it doesn't just sound like a wall of sound that just everybody's playing at the same time. And there are times for that, but how do you build up to that? And so that, and then also singing, it made me think about vocal arrangements and where do we sing and how do we sing. I think for me, being a musician producer, and there are lots of those guys that do that, I base all my production off the fact that I was a musician, a road musician, and a club musician, and studied it. And then, because really, when I was at North Texas, I got started in production, volunteering produce, which is one of the things. I think we've got some points. We want to give people points to do that. I don't want to jump ahead, but I was all over the place. If I wasn't doing anything for the band, big band at the time, they recorded everything at North Texas. So they needed a technician that could record. Well, I volunteered. And so I cut my teeth on cutting big band, and microphone placement and all this stuff, and figuring out what did work and didn't work, because it was a college, you get to fail, So yeah. I think to answer your question, being a player and a vocalist is definitely how I always look at production.
And I tell you, there's no better way to tell if a song is resonating or not than in the moment on stage.
Oh yeah. I mean, if I write, and I still write today, so if I write a new song, I might go play it for my wife. And there was a time before we came to Nashville, when my wife's an actress and she was in LA, I would send her stuff, and she, early in our relationship, she would just be all gaga about that song. And then when she came to town, she fit right into the music scene. So she became a creative director for a publishing company and a song plugger. So then when I started playing her songs, she goes, second verse, I don't know about that second. So a little sparkle came off of it, but I think I got better second verses out of it. So it's fun. Yeah. But playing it out in the club, man, people are either going to stop talking or they're going to listen to you or they're going to get up. If they like it in Texas, they're going to dance. If you play something, you don't have somebody on the dance floor in Texas, you ain't doing it right. So, yeah.
I love that. That's some great advice right there. If you're not moving bodies, you're not making hits.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's a rule of thumb songwriters always have. You got to make them laugh, cry, or make love. If you can get those three things in a song, one of those, pick which one you're writing that day, and if you can hit one of those, then the song has a good chance. So,
all right, I love that. I'm totally going to pull that for a pull quote.
Use that,
that's
baby.
Incredible.
Use it.
Well, awesome. So you're playing these clubs in Texas. You're writing these commercial jingles. What made the move from Texas to Nashville?
I was out in LA and playing it was funny. Had several gigs going. Of course, married an actress, so I was in LA with her while she was doing her career, and got out there and still being a musician and wanting to do that most of the time without having to go down and do something. I did some other stuff on the side like we all do to pay the bills till it gets going. But I was a band leader for an actor that wanted to be, Grant Goodeve at that time, who was the oldest son. This is way before your time. Oldest son in the show Eight Is Enough, and he was a great singer and songwriter. And we just met through friends. And he said, "I've always wanted to play the Palomino." I said, "Well, put a band together and let's go play." So because he had clout as an actor, we pulled players together, and I was the band leader and did the arrangements and played piano and what have you. And then that was that. And then, of course, playing with another band. And then I had a little country band that I played with. In fact, part of my history is, sorry, Jeff, I played with Jeffrey Steele in Orange County. He and we had a 4-piece country band. And he was doing all kinds of stuff, doing vocals and jingles and all kinds of stuff. And then we were gigging on the weekend in a country band in Orange County. And so, you just do whatever you do, and learn your craft and doing all that stuff. So we stayed there until basically Deborah kind of went, "Okay, I think I've had enough." And of course, the story of us is I came out here because I submitted some songs to a publisher. And the publisher said, "Hey," called me one day. I just made the move. I said, and this is funny how it happens a lot sometimes. I just said, "Okay, I'm going to go to LA and give that a try so I can be with my wife." And she had a friend that was the head of set design on television shows, and he knew I was a carpenter. I grew up swinging a hammer. And he said, "Well, man, I can get you in the union. You want to just make a career out of building sets for television?" And I thought, if I can't be a writer and a producer, that might be cool. So I was working toward that, and I get a phone call from a guy here in Nashville that said, "Hey, I got your at that time tape on my desk, and I'm going to sign a writer. I'd really like to talk to you about signing you." So of course I hung up the phone and looked at Deborah and said, "What do I do?" And she says, "You've been chasing this. You should go talk to him." And so I drove back and talked to him, and he went, "Yeah, let's start." So I called her and said, "Okay, it looks like I'm staying here." So for 3 years, she lived there and I lived here. And I was writing songs for a publishing company, and she was acting. And it was a lot of song ideas came out of those 3 years. So yeah, but so that's kind of what brought me to Nashville, to get me as a songwriter and kept me in the studio. I love the studio. So
out of LA into Nashville, brought there by a publisher. So you're focusing on songwriting. Right. What was that experience like at the time? Because what was that? That's late 80s, mid-late 80s?
Yeah, we got here in 87.
Okay.
So I got here, I'd been in and out of Nashville for years, but never really landing here. I mean, if you really go back to, if you want to pull my age out of the closet here, I was really starting, I got here in 75 as a young kid and started writing with the George Jones band and cutting stuff in the studio back then with my good friend. And we were acoustic duo, writing songs together in Boulder, Colorado. And we decided to go to Nashville and play our songs. And there was that. Long story short, we decided not to stay because we both had girlfriends in Boulder. Great business move. Don't do that. So I always say, if I'd stayed here in 75, I would either be, famous or dead, because that's what happens in those years. But that got me here. Then when we moved here in 87, I knew the way that what I wanted to do was get in the studio, stay in the studio. And one of the ways, because I could write songs that publishers wanted, they send the songwriter out to produce the demo. They give you your budget, you book a session of your songs, and you book the players, and you do all the stuff. Well, I cut my teeth on that in Texas. So that put me back in the studio and let me try arranging things on songs. And while we still had to arrange it for radio, I was not afraid to try something outside the norm. And yet hedge my bet. Sometimes I'd mix it twice, one with the idea that I thought would be outside the box, and one without that idea, because the publisher and the song plugger had to say, I can pitch this or I can't, because you still have to weigh who's paying your bill, who's paying your salary. You want to give them what they want, but you want them to give you enough rope that you can go do something creative with it. So
how common was that in the late 80s? I know that it's a little different now with the advent of home studios and production's been kind of democratized, but in the late 80s and early 90s, I felt like that would be a really awesome differentiator for you, that you are a songwriter, you're a musician, and you know how to produce.
Right. I think that what I'm a big believer in loving the creativity of players. I can sit in, I play many instruments because I had to take them all in school. And when you hand me a saxophone, I can hurt your ears with it. It's stupid. It's not good, but I can play it. But what I found is if I sit down and do a one-man band demo, I lose the creativity of people. And that's one of the things I learned from doing big band stuff. Man, you got a whole bunch of players that are all excellent players. You go take the solo, to first or second chair sax, and he stands up and does what he does. And the same thing, when I came to town, it was still go in the studio, hire your players, get the people you like, and because you bond with players every time you use them in the studio, you either click with them or you don't. And there's no right or wrong about that. It's just personalities and styles and whatever. And just say, okay, here's the chart, here's the demo. It's usually a guitar or vocal demo. Here are my thoughts as production. Ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba. And then unless I have something really, really specific, like the hook lead in line for the guitar player to play or the piano, I kind of say, let them do their thing. I want their creativity and say, okay, of course, back then we did the Davidson County second verse. First verse was, everybody played, might have been more heavy on acoustic or electric. Then second verse, we'd say Davidson County. That means the piano player is the predominant player on the second verse, which that may or may not still be a term. I don't know. But then you sit down and listen to it back and go, okay, here's what this is great. Here's how I want to mold this part right here. And here's what I want to do here, which is different than doing stuff when you're writing for players that are actually reading every note. I can write the notes out for them, but there are a lot of players that would say, yeah, I can read that. And I did a bunch of that. But what I found more productive, especially because in a demo scenario, you've got money's time is money. I have to get so many songs within a certain session time to make my publisher happy. So I found the most efficient way to make that was not try to write every note out, but I would write like a theme line and go da 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 da. That's the theme line I want. Who wants to play it? And do you have any better ideas than that? Because maybe that sucks, when you get the whole band together. So I'm very let the people who are experts on their instruments put something into it. Let them do what they do. Don't try to micromanage their notes. So.
Oh, that's awesome. I think that, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but I know from my perspective, when I write, I record all the instruments, but it's almost like I become more focused on just getting it done and not so much,
right,
does this sound the absolute best that it could? It's like, well, do I need to get it done?
Yeah. And also you turn into a technician. That's the thing for me. I can sit and play piano, bass. I can do a drum track. I can create all kinds of stuff. but then I'm a technician, and somewhere along the way I might lose that spark of creativity. Whereas if I put this raw piece of paper with a general idea of what my creative ideas in front of the best players, and then they play, and you're going to either love it or you're going to have some changes, or you might hear it that way and go, that was so wrong, and that actually is not, I pointed y'all down the wrong street. Let's back up and go down this way, because I thought I wanted to hear it like that, but maybe now let's try to make it like that. And the good thing about these guys, man, sure, they on a dime, they turn and play it the way, a different style or down a different path. And as a producer, it's, and with time you learn how to discern which path is good for a song. And as when I was a songwriter and producing my own demos, that was my training ground. I got to go, hey, I had this idea that's going to sound like this. And they play it like that, and it's horrible. And I go, okay, well, that was a really bad idea. So let's point it this way. And they go, okay. And they play it and they go, yep, let's run that direction. Because you get that time. Now, as you keep doing it, you learn to, like I said, to discern which path is good and which is not. And so you get better at pointing it in the right direction, because you do it more frequently. The more you do it, the better you get, kind of thing.
Absolutely. So here in Nashville, you're producing your own demo sessions for songs that you've written. Then what happens? What's the next move?
Yeah. I think for me, I learned early on in North Texas and studying that, like I said, I volunteered to record the jazz band on their concerts and hook up the mics and run the stuff. And then when I would mix that, I would mix it to follow the music, because I could read music. I knew whose solo was going. I knew what was happening. And to me, my big thing was, if you want to really learn to produce, you have to either produce yourself, which is good, find some way to do that, or you have to say to your friends who are writers and say, hey, let me produce this for you just for free. I just want the experience. You can either keep it or trash it. I don't care, but I want to volunteer as much of my effort to make this the best it can be for you, and then get your feedback. Because production is not just putting it all down, it's listening to the artist and going, I've got what I hear, but you got to listen to the artist and make sure that it's a direction they want to run, or you're going to be, butting heads all the time on what the vision is. So to me, I think another good action step is always look for opportunity to produce something for somebody, friends, family, other writers, other players that you may run into somewhere in a club. Go, man, I love your band. And back then, and there may be this now, I haven't really touched it, but back then I had friends that were going to school at Belmont, and they'd call me and go, man, we, as part of our, as students at Belmont, we get a free weekend in the studio. Would you come produce the session? I said, absolutely. And what would you charge? I'm not charging anything. Let's just go do it. Because you're getting the players you get. It might be everybody's friend. It might be their sister. You don't know who's playing, So you just go in there, say it's for free, and you just cut your teeth doing all this in the studio and, producing it with the writer or the artist. So to me, that was another ground. Look for some place, because these guys had free studio. And I go, yeah, free studio, let's go, So you just have to, music is not a solo. I've always thought it's not a solo event. It's a group event. And the more you get, the more people you get involved of quality that you like and like to be with, the broader your scope of what you're learning and your opportunities, because if I had not had the friend at Belmont, I wouldn't have got the free studio time at Belmont. So good. And that the free thing goes from one thing to the next thing. I did it free for them. Somebody in their class heard it and went, who did that? Say, well, TW did it. I get a phone call from them, go, hey, I got free studio time. Can you come? Yes. And I go do it. So it's like one thing leads to the next thing, learns the next one, and after a while, you get good enough to say, okay, well, now I'm ready to go produce something and someone pay me something, so it's also training ground kind of stuff.
I love that approach. And that's kind of the approach that I've taken with my friends. And doing things for free, I know that people have a lot of different thoughts
Sure.
on that, but you hit the nail on the head. You know, when you're cutting your teeth and you're early on, do all that you can. Get every experience, meet
Absolutely.
everyone. And I mean, I hate to say guarantee, but I'm going to say it. If you do stuff when you're for free early on, you know, you might not get, you're not going to get 9 out of 10 home runs, but you might get 1 out of 10. And that
Right.
home run might connect you with a writer who then has the connection with a music supervisor. And then, you know, it's amazing how things can just blossom that way.
Right. And I think there's a thin line too. You have to know where you stop doing free and start saying, okay. And I think for me, once the deal was, once I was getting calls all the time going, hey, I have free studio time. Would you come do it? And I did X amount of those and it spread through the people. I go, I can but because I'm slammed, I'll do it for this reduced rate just for my time. So you start adding a little bit, and that's where you work with and say, well, what's your budget look like? Do you have any money? Because I need a little bit for my time because I could be over here. And then you look at someone, you run across somebody who goes, well, I'm going to release this as an independent artist. Okay. Well, so the word release sounds good to me because now you've released a single that the producer is this person, and then that's going to be talked about by whoever's playing it or not, or it's going to go through the channels of players and artists about, hey, who produced your project, you know? And they say, well, TW Hale. You got his number? You know, it kind of starts working its way through, you know, and then you start getting phone calls and you can say, what's your budget? It's always the first question for me is, do you have a budget and what's your budget? And then if you want to work with the talent, then you go, all right, I'm gonna work with you. You know, let's do this together because I like the project. So
I know a lot of folks have varying degrees of understanding of what a producer does. And I know that that word producer means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, especially nowadays, where the term producer can mean simply someone who makes a backing track, like a beat. It can mean someone who is booking players and kind of working with arrangements. You've got your Rick Rubin types who just kind of come in, know nothing about music, but just listen and they kind of rely on their taste. Or you've got producers that understand the engineering side of the project. So I'd love to find out where you stand, you know, on that spectrum of production.
sure, great question. I think that for me, because I've worked with all those producers you just mentioned, all those styles and types of producer. For me, because I have a musical background and I have a music and a degree in it, which I don't ever say I have a music degree because really I can say I have an accounting degree, but I do music. So it's kind of what it is. But I do have some background in it. And because I'm a player and a vocalist, I kind of work from that point of view. And I can sit at a board and do some stuff, but I got most of my board and my EQ and all my engineering information from working with and engineer mentors that I have worked with either through doing demos or hiring them on production projects and becoming friends with them, and then sitting in a room, just all of us, you know, going, hey, well, what happens if you do this to the kick drum? And he goes, well, that's going to suck because listen, you know. So I see myself as a person who looks at the creative picture. And yeah, I can add a bunch of elements from music to from players to singers and to some board stuff. Like I can tell one of my favorite people in the world to work with is Tom Harding, and because his his engineering and his production skills are phenomenal, and we jive on that stuff. But I can look at Tom and go, he goes, well, what do you think? Because then you stand back as a guy who would walk in and go, listen to it musically, you know, that may know nothing about anything except does it sound good, you know, and I can say to Tom, here's what I'm missing. And try to vocalize it in a way that makes sense to him. And he goes, what are you missing? I said, I don't hear a point on the kick drum. He's going to get that. And somebody else will go, I don't know what you mean, but he's going to go, oh, okay, watch this. And he'll go tweak something, go, yep, that's it. And he goes, Yeah, okay. And then, it's that kind of stuff. So I rely on the guy behind the board or the girl behind the board. I mean, I've worked with great, engineers that do both, that can do that. That, you just find out a language that makes what you're hearing in your head. You can say, I don't know what to do with this because I'm not that person. So how do I get this sound on this snare drum? And he goes, well, we'll do this to it. Is that the sound you're looking for? Yes, thank you. Well, now I take note of what he did to get that. So now next time I'll know it. But, I don't know if that answered, but here's the other end. When I do a first mix of something, I walk it out and play it to somebody who listens to radio. Because I'm so used to hearing it in studio and everything. And one of my favorite people to do that with is my wife, because she is she has consumer ears. She listens as someone who puts a CD in the car and drives down the street and comes through the speakers in her car. That's how she listens. And to me, that's what you're thinking about radio, and to me, I get so close to it and I hear all the little details. It's hard to step back and be a consumer sometime with consumer ears,
Let's fast forward a little bit over the last, we'll say 3 to 5 years. How have you been able to stay active? How have you been able to transition this democratization of production and recording? What are you doing and how are you doing it?
Yeah, I think for me, of course, early on, I because being a songwriter that wanted to not always had every dollar to put money into demos, I did like most songwriter, player, musicians, and bought a computer. In fact, one of my first musical computers was a little Macintosh, the little square box. And then I'd get a MIDI program and I had MIDI keyboards and I'd played all that kind of stuff. So I think for me, it's still, my love is going to the studio with players. But at the same time, like in my studio now, I'm hooked up to MIDI. So this is my pre-production room. And I have enough MIDI sounds and all this stuff that I can kind of get a feel about. So I do pre-production with electronic stuff now as much as I used to do it ahead of time, because I don't have I do my own demos still. So I do use that for demos, but on pre-production stuff on projects, I'll come in this room and say, my mind says, my ear says, I want to do this. Well, I have enough stuff here that I can see whether that feels right or not. And so I think to stay up current, you have to kind of, listen to new producers, listen to new songs, listen to people, that are out there doing stuff because they're doing it differently, and study what they do, what makes this song, and what did they do to it? And the internet, come on, you can read every article on the internet you want to. And of course, you have to wade through all the junk. But if you get someone who's a true producer and doing stuff and they give you true stuff, you can take it with a grain of salt or a pound of salt, depending on what you feel about it, and then see, is there anything in there I can use? And so to me, I just keep learning. It's technology, music changes. And I love some of the older artists that were out there, and I hated to hear them say, man, music sucks, it's gone away from da 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 da. Because I would always say to them, hey, music changes, or we'd still be singing Gregorian chants. And if we don't change with it, then we should go fishing. We should get in a boat, go fishing, because it changes. And if you want to be in the music industry, you should learn about how it's changing and what it wants to do, because that keeps you active and current. If you get tired of doing that because it's the eternal learning curve, then go fishing and let somebody else who's now hungry to learn that do it. There is a cycle. I mean, the cycle is we work and do our job until we say, I think I'll go fishing. So for me, I'm not ready to go fishing yet. So what do? I learn every day. If I hear a song or a sound or some new act or some new production, I'm going to dissect it. What makes this sound? And I'm going to find some way to find out what did they do? I mean, a lot of times you can hear a song by a certain producer and go, what did they do to get that sound? Well, if you go Google that, you know, and search engine it and go, hey, what did, you know, Jimmy John do to this song to get that snare sound? Somebody out there is going to have an opinion. Now, is it right? I don't know. That's where you have to wade through to see if it's true or not. But for me, I guess I would say just continue to learn. You know, if you want to do it, you got to learn it. As it changes, you got to stay with it. And that's songwriting or producing, either one. You know, I can write old time country stuff with steel guitar and fiddles. I'm just trying to figure out where I would get it played. You know, there are radio stations that do it. I'm not saying they don't. I'm just saying in the mainstream, what's being played. So how do you fit that, what you're producing in the mainstream, you know, or close as you can get to. So
I think artists who really embrace the changing of times are clearly the ones that last the longest, and they're the ones that are still relevant. And if you're a fan or not a fan, I always use Madonna as a really good example.
Yep.
For someone who came up in like the mid 80s and had this very 80s sound, and then in the early 90s transitioned with that really aggressive, you know, sound, and then transitioned again, and then she had like the Austin Powers era where it was more dance focused. And every 5 to 6 years, or David Bowie's a great example, you know, just
totally
reinvented himself over and over again to kind of meet the audience where they were.
Yeah. And I think artists like that, and of course Madonna had great production skills too, because she knew what she wanted to hear and what it wanted to be. So and I'm not, you know, and so, but you look at someone like Lady Gaga, look at her early stuff. It was an affected thing that got her noticed. And then she developed into this person that could do all that stuff without the effect. Then she morphed into someone who does movies. And I think that's as an artist, as a producer, as a player, you know, you just learn new stuff all the time. If you keep learning, then you're going to bring a fresh approach to anything you do, because you're going to go, hey, what if I try this? I just learned this. Will it work here? And it may or may not, but you're still learning. So yeah, I agree. Artists and producers that grow with the times and look at what the public ear is now listening to, be it good or bad. I know a lot of people that can't stand rap. I think there's some rap that's really good and has some stuff in it that you want to go, now that's interesting. And that's what I always listen for. What's interesting? I want to know. I want to know what makes my ear go, ooh, that was cool. I'm going to go find that out so that can I use it anywhere, you know? So.
Awesome. Well, TW, now we're to my favorite part of the show, where we get to discuss what are the 3 actionable items that we can provide someone who wants to be a songwriter, producer. What information can you provide them where they can go move their career forward today?
Sure. And I kind of touched on some of those while we talked. But for me, I think, you know, and I kind of jotted some stuff down here. If you have it in your head, if you're not a player or a singer, but man, you hear production, and when you hear music, you see it in your head, then you need to listen to all you can, everything. And I mean everything. I mean, if it's rap, listen to rap. If it's a certain producer, you know, and pick producers, you know, but also pick the song that rattles your cage. You know, if it's something that you go, I dig that, then go figure out why you dig it. But that to me is listening and then honing in what you like about stuff. You know, one of my things is David Foster he's the king of transitions and key changes. And so you want to learn how to do that really well, go listen to everything he does, because he's excellent. So then go pick somebody else. So to me, it's listen and learn from them. And then I guess the second one, which I touched on, to get started, and find some friends with free studio time that need some production help. You need anybody that needs, if you can run a board, if you can engineer, volunteer some time, you know, go say, hey man, let me run the board while y'all do this. Because every time you're behind the board, then you can also say, hey, when y'all play this here, what happens if you did that? Okay, try it. Well, that's producing, you know? And so in little steps, you start becoming that. So I think that volunteering with your friends to get you there until you can start charging, because nobody gets to start charging from the beginning. I mean, maybe they do, but I don't know how. So that's that one. And I think the other one, what was the other one? I guess it was, we talked about it. You got to learn to adjust and grow with the music. I mean, we kind of talked about them, but to me, those are the three. Once you're going, don't get locked into, this is the only thing I do. And you can do that, but then that's the only thing you'll do. But what if, you do this outlandish, production on some outside the box artist that's independent, and then all of a sudden you have somebody that calls you up that's kind of mainstream, but they like what you did on this indie artist, but can you do that to what I do? Well, yeah, I can, but you have to honor what they do too, and still bring some of that, what they heard. And, that's where you ask questions. What did you hear you liked? I like this that you do, and this that you do, and this that you don't. Be afraid to communicate with the artist, because it's their vision, it's their heart, and your job is to help them get there. And if you want it to be your vision all the way, then you need to be the artist so you can produce yourself. And anyway, that's kind of what it is in three. There's kind of a broad scope at it, but to get started, volunteer, get out and do as much of the work you can. You got to have hands-on to learn everything you can from producers, other producers, why you like them. And then three, grow with the music. Don't get locked into something. Figure out where you are and then grow from there. So
that is some incredible advice. And TW, really appreciate it. You taking some time out today to talk to us. And
thank you.
Sure, absolutely. And I'm sure the listeners are going to take a lot away from this conversation. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate it. You have a great one.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Do That Music Thing podcast. To learn more about me, the host, Christopher Foust, you can catch me online at christopherfoust.com, on Instagram at chrisfaustmusic, or on Twitter at chrisjamesgtr. If you'd like to be a guest on the Do That Music Thing podcast, please feel free to email me at chrisfaustmusic@gmail.com. If you're a fan of the show, head on over and leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening. I'm Chris Foust. Let's go do that music thing.